Time to show a bit of love for the Balearic slingers of antiquity. Just so you know, this is the Balearic Islands and it's located off the east coast of Spain in the Mediterranean. And according to Polybius, they even got the name Balearic from the word meaning to throw, which suggests that the idea of ranged combat or using a sling, that kind of thing, was something that was in the blood. And there's an interesting anecdote about Balearic mothers. Apparently, when they taught their kids at a young age to use the sling, one of the methods would be to place their breakfast, that is probably small bits of bread, on poles, and you couldn't eat anything until you knocked it off the pole. It's worth mentioning that if you're a slinger, it didn't automatically mean you'd end up in an army. It wasn't a military vocation. Being a slinger was just a very useful skill set to have. For example, shepherds were often slingers or carried a sling because you could use it to keep your cattle safe. And I've read in the modern period that you could even guide them around. You could kind of herd your cattle using the sling to hit things around the animals to move them around. That aside, and going back to the military capacity, slingers could be particularly effective. It was Hannibal who picked up the Balearic slingers to use in his army, and it's worth noting that slingers were used in armies earlier. For example, Rhodian slingers featured in Xenophon's Anabasis, the March of the 10,000, where they were within the ranks of a mercenary army and used to great effect there. Where Balearic slingers and slingers in general were so useful was because they could hit the enemy at a number of distances. In fact, Balearic slingers apparently had 3 different types of sling to use, which could accommodate different ranges. And as to how effective they were, well, that can be a bit of a tricky thing to work out. And I say that not because they weren't effective, they absolutely were, and I'll get onto that in a second. It's more a case of there being a number of variables to consider when you're trying to assess how effective they were. In a lot of the videos that you'll find on YouTube, you'll see slingers, particularly when they're using the Balearic sling or they're looking at slings in antiquity, they'll be quite close up and they're using that to gauge how effective and dangerous they were. And that's true up close. Obviously, these guys would be very, very dangerous. But the reality was they didn't really want to get too close. You wanted to be 100 meters and more away from the enemy, because ultimately, these guys haven't got any kind of armor. They're not there to fight with anything other really than their sling. So you want to keep them at a healthy distance away from the enemy. And Balearic slingers, as well as other slingers, would hit you with 2 different types of weapon. I said weapon, I actually mean missile, because there were 2 missile types used by Balearic slingers, in fact by slingers in general. There would be pebbles, which they'd source, find and work out which ones were the best to go in their slings, or lead bullets. Now, both of these ammunition types are going to be travelling at well over 100 miles an hour, so they're going to do damage, albeit in different ways. With the lead bullets, more damage. They're likely to actually stick in the skin. And in fact, Celsus, who was writing in the 1st century AD, he's a Roman, recorded in his medical works how surgeons would try and remove these lead bullets from in the flesh. He even refers to pebbles as well in some instances. So again, there's a possibility that pebbles can do that amount of damage. Physically then, slingers are going to do you a lot of problems. And I've seen ranges of around 250 as thought to have been the ideal distance that the slinger could cause that kind of problem to you. But I also think it's worth thinking about the psychological, because imagining you're lining up against these guys and they're hitting you with pebbles, well, that's one thing. But then if you know that the lead bullets might be coming, assuming there are any, that's going to cause you even more problems. So I think the fact that they were even on the battlefield often put the opposition or the enemy under quite a lot of psychological duress. And as we've seen in particular with armies in antiquity, they were very much about installing mechanisms whereby you could cause psychological detriment to the enemy. That's what you were trying to do at all points. And this rang from the sort of marching in step, the sounds, the noise. You're always trying to put the fear on the enemy. And I certainly think slingers did this. Slingers are somewhat overlooked, I think. And hopefully this video is giving you some reasons as to why they were so effective. And also a trip down memory lane for anyone who played Rome Total War, or still does. And if you like this kind of thing, and Rome Total War, click follow.